My name is Robert Hale, and on the night my company honored 40 years of my life, I learned something no plaque or crystal trophy could ever soften. My only son had quietly stopped seeing me as his father. And what happened 3 hours later, sitting alone in my truck with a phone that wouldn't stop ringing, changed everything I thought I understood about family. Stay with me, because this story doesn't end where you think it will. The ballroom lights dimmed slowly, the way they do right before something important is about to happen. Hundreds of people filled the seats of the downtown convention center, coworkers, executives, old friends, a few faces from the local news. The host stepped up to the podium, her voice warm and steady. "Tonight," she said, "we celebrate a man whose integrity has quietly shaped this company for 4 decades." Behind her, the giant screens lit up with old photographs. There I was in 1985, barely 25, wearing a hard hat 2 sizes too big. Then more pictures, company picnics, retirement parties for men who were no longer with us, charity drives, holiday dinners. For 40 years I had stood in the crowd clapping for everyone else. Tonight, apparently, it was my turn. The applause rolled through the room like a wave. I smiled, nodded, did what you're supposed to do. But my eyes kept drifting toward the front row, toward one chair that sat empty. A small white card rested on it. 2 words, reserved family. That chair belonged to my son. The camera found it before I did. Then the audience found it. And even before a single word was spoken, everyone in that room understood exactly what they were looking at. A father, honored for a lifetime of service, with an empty seat where his own child should have been sitting. The host noticed too. She walked toward me gently. "Would you like us to wait a few more minutes?" I shook my head, no. "Would you like someone to sit beside you instead?" I looked out across the crowd, past the executives in their pressed suits, until I found a young man standing near the back wall. Nervous, hands folded, wearing a navy suit that clearly wasn't expensive but had been ironed with care, like it mattered to him to look right tonight. I smiled, Marcus. His eyes went wide. He was the son of my best friend, a man who was no longer alive to see this. I asked Marcus to come sit beside me, and for a moment he looked almost frightened, like he didn't believe the invitation was real. He walked down that aisle like every step cost him something, and when he finally sat down next to me, I put a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for coming," I said. His voice barely made it out. I wouldn't have missed this for anything. Neither of us knew yet that in exactly 2 hours, something was going to happen on that stage that would be replayed on television screens across 3 states, and that somewhere far away, my own son would be watching it happen live, from beside a hotel pool. 5 minutes later, the CEO returned to the microphone with a smile that told me he was hiding something. "There's one more surprise," he said. I frowned. Nobody had told me about a surprise. "Years ago," he continued, "Robert quietly turned down several executive bonuses. Instead, he asked us to build something bigger, a fund built on loyalty, sacrifice, and quiet service to others." A murmur spread through the crowd. "That fund begins tonight," he said, "and its very first recipient was chosen personally by Robert himself." Marcus looked confused, then the CEO smiled straight at him. "Marcus Bell will receive an $800,000 legacy gift." The room exploded. People stood. Some cried. Marcus froze completely, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to find words that didn't exist. I think there's been some kind of mistake," he stammered. "There hasn't," the CEO said gently. I squeezed his shoulder. "You earned this." 3 hours later, I sat by myself in my old pickup truck outside my small house, and my phone would not stop buzzing. When I finally turned it over, the screen told me I had 112 missed calls. Most of them were from my son, Daniel. The rest were his wife, distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, even a reporter or two. I stared at that number for a long time. Then I set the phone face down on the passenger seat, because the story the whole country had just watched on television had actually started 6 years earlier, and none of them knew the half of it yet. 6 years ago, I never imagined my family could quietly drift this far apart. My wife, Susan, and I had built an honest, unremarkable life. Cookouts, camping trips, pizza on Friday nights, church on Sunday mornings. Daniel grew up believing we weren't wealthy people, and the truth is, we weren't. We simply believed money was meant to buy security, not attention. Susan passed away after a short fight with pancreatic cancer. Daniel was 31 then, already married, already deep into building his own life. Her death changed something in both of us. For me, it left silence. For Daniel, it left distance. At first, I told myself that was normal. Jobs get demanding. Marriages need attention. I never expected weekly visits or monthly dinners. I only hoped we'd still be father and son. Instead, our conversations slowly turned into scheduling. Dad, I'll call you later. Dad, we're busy this weekend. Dad, maybe next month. Months became seasons. Seasons became years. Whenever Daniel did visit, his wife Melissa always seemed eager to leave. She was never openly rude. She simply treated time with me like an obligation squeezed between brunches and vacations. And somewhere along the way, my son stopped making his own decisions. If Melissa wanted something, that became his opinion too. I noticed the small things first. He stopped fishing with me, stopped coming by to watch football, stopped calling to ask my advice on anything. Even his birthday wishes to me became text messages. I never complained because good parents don't keep score. Then, 3 months before my retirement ceremony, the company announced something unexpected. They wanted to honor employees who had given 40 years of continuous service. Only 2 of us qualified. One had already retired overseas. That left me. Honestly, I would have been thrilled with a handshake and cake in the break room, but the CEO insisted. "You spent 40 years taking care of this company," he told me. "Now let us take care of you." A week later, I drove over to Daniel's house to hand him the invitation myself. He answered the door in golf clothes while Melissa loaded suitcases into their SUV. "Heading somewhere?" I asked. "Weekend trip," he said. Then he opened the invitation and his eyebrows lifted. "They're televising this? That's pretty cool, Dad. I'd love to be there." He glanced at Melissa, then back at me. "Of course I'll be there," he said, and he hugged me. "Wouldn't miss it." I believed every word, because no matter how old your child becomes, some part of you will always believe the promises they make to you. I had no idea that 24 hours before that ceremony, my phone would ring, and one 5-minute conversation would change the shape of everything. His name stayed lit up on my screen for several rings before I finally answered, and somehow I already knew. "Hey, Dad," his voice was cheerful, too cheerful. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, listen, Melissa found this incredible last-minute deal. A resort out in Arizona. 5 stars. We're leaving in the morning." The morning of my ceremony. I leaned against the kitchen counter and looked out at the old maple tree Susan, and I had planted 25 years earlier, swaying gently in the wind. "I thought your ceremony was in the afternoon," he said quickly, "but we already booked the flights." "You haven't booked them yet," I said quietly. A pause, "No, so you could still come." Then I heard Melissa's voice in the background. "Babe, tell him he'll understand." Daniel lowered his voice. "Dad, we've both been working so hard, she really needs this." I smiled, though nobody could see it. "I understand. We'll celebrate next week. I'll take you both out somewhere nice." "You're not upset?" "No, really. I'm 70 years old, Daniel." He laughed, relieved. "Guess you've learned not to sweat the small stuff." If only he knew. We hung up. The house went quiet again. My late wife used to tell me something whenever Daniel disappointed us as a teenager. "Don't react while you're hurting, wait until you can think clearly." She was always the wiser one. So I didn't call him back. I didn't send an angry text. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found another name, Marcus Bell. He picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Hale, I hope I'm not interrupting your dinner." "Not at all," I said. "I have a favor to ask." "Anything," he said, without a single second of hesitation. That alone tightened something in my throat. "My company's holding a ceremony tomorrow. My son won't be there. I'd like someone sitting beside me." There was a pause, then his voice cracked slightly. "You want me there?" "I do, I'd be honored." No questions, no excuses, no checking his calendar, just I'd be honored. It was the first time I'd smiled all evening. "Your father would be proud of you," I told him. "I hope so," he said softly. I had known Marcus almost 30 years, since he was a skinny kid racing his bike down our street while his father, Thomas, grilled hamburgers in the backyard. Thomas wasn't just my coworker, he was my brother in every way except blood. We started at the same manufacturing plant 6 months apart, bought our first houses the same year. Our wives became inseparable. Our sons grew up playing catch in the same yard. Then came the accident. It happened during a maintenance shutdown, a faulty pressure valve, wrong place, wrong second. Metal screamed, steam filled the room, and I couldn't see anything. Something heavy came down beside me. I remember falling. I remember thinking, this is it. But Thomas didn't run for the exit. He ran toward me. He dragged me across that concrete floor while every alarm in the building was screaming. Doctors later told me another 30 seconds in that room would have killed me. Thomas never once talked about it afterward. Whenever someone called him a hero, he'd just shrug. You'd have done the same. Maybe I would have. I'll never know because he never gave me the chance to prove it. Years later, cancer finished what that explosion couldn't. The night before he died, he asked everyone else to leave the room. Just the two of us left. He reached for my hand. Look after my boy. You won't have to ask twice, I told him. He smiled, I knew that. Those were the last words he ever spoke to me. Marcus was 19 then, too young to lose a father, too proud to ask anyone for help. He stocked shelves at night, took classes during the day, delivered pizzas on the weekends. Every time I offered money, he politely refused. I'll figure it out. So instead, I found other ways. When his truck died, I connected him with a retired mechanic who rebuilt the engine for almost nothing. When he transferred to the State University's engineering program, I helped him find affordable housing. When he graduated, I sat in that audience, not because anyone expected me to, but because I'd made a promise to his father. Life had other plans for Marcus. He discovered he loved mentoring teenagers more than engineering and became a public school robotics teacher. Some people thought he was wasting his degree. I never did. Every Christmas, he mailed me a handwritten card. Every time my gutters needed cleaning, he somehow found out before I even asked and showed up carrying a toolbox. Figured you could use another set of hands. That's the kind of man his father had raised. The next morning, I arrived at the convention center early, and Marcus was already waiting outside in that same well-worn navy suit. You clean up pretty well, I teased. He laughed. It's the only suit I own. It looks perfect. He handed me a small gift bag, a plain leather journal, and on the very first page, one handwritten sentence. Some men earn promotions, others earn respect. You taught me the difference. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Your father would be proud, I finally said. I've spent 20 years hoping you'd say that, he answered. Right before we walked inside, my phone buzzed with a new photo. Daniel and Melissa beside a sparkling pool, sunglasses on, drinks in hand. The caption read, finally taking the vacation we deserve. Life's too short. I locked the phone and turned to Marcus. Ready. As I'll ever be, he said. Neither of us had any idea that within the next 2 hours, the entire audience, and everyone watching at home, was about to witness something that not even I fully saw coming. The ballroom had filled beyond capacity. Over 400 people, executives, factory workers, retirees, reporters with cameras rolling near the stage. Everything felt far more polished than I ever expected for a man who would have been perfectly happy with cake in a break room. Marcus and I sat together in the front row. He kept glancing around like he was afraid someone would realize he didn't belong there. Relax, I told him. I'm trying. I've spoken to a room full of teenagers before. Somehow this is scarier. Trust me, I said. Teenagers are tougher. That got a real laugh out of him. A few seats away, board members I'd worked with for decades nodded at me, shook my hand, thanked me quietly for years of service. But every few minutes, eyes drifted toward the one empty chair still sitting where my son should have been. Nobody asked where he was. Nobody had to. The empty seat spoke loud enough on its own. At exactly 2 o'clock, the lights dimmed and a video began playing across the enormous screens. There I was at 27, hair thick, standing beside the first production line I'd ever supervised. Then Susan and I at a company Christmas party, her wearing a red dress she'd bought on clearance because every spare dollar was going into Daniel's college fund. My chest tightened at that one. Then a photo of Daniel himself at 7 years old, wearing an oversized hard hat during family day, insisting he wanted to work alongside his dad one day. Funny how life changes. The audience applauded as decade after decade rolled across the screen. 40 years compressed into 5 minutes. Only I knew how many missed weekends, how many overnight shifts, how many quiet sacrifices filled the spaces between those photographs. The host returned to the podium. Robert Hale became more than an employee here, she said. He became the standard the rest of us tried to live up to. Then she invited the CEO, Daniel Walsh, up to speak. He'd started sweeping warehouse floors while putting himself through college, and one reason we always respected each other was that neither of us had forgotten where we started. "I've worked beside Robert for 31 years, he said. In all that time, I've never once questioned whether he'd do the right thing." He paused. Sometimes the right thing cost him promotions. He turned down opportunities because they would have meant moving his family across the country. I hadn't expected him to bring that up. He also turned down performance bonuses, more than once. Now I actually frowned. We hadn't discussed him saying that publicly. He smiled like he'd read my mind. "I know he hates attention, but tonight isn't about what makes him comfortable. It's about telling the truth." One employee after another came up and shared stories I'd half forgotten, staying overnight during a blizzard so younger workers wouldn't have to drive home unsafely, quietly covering a receptionist's husband's medical bills after his stroke. When you help someone, you don't usually keep records. You just move on with your life. Then they called me up to the stage. The applause lasted nearly a full minute, and standing under those lights felt deeply uncomfortable. I would have traded it in a heartbeat to be back fixing machinery on the factory floor. They handed me a heavy crystal award, 40 years. It suddenly felt very real. Then the host turned toward Marcus. "We noticed someone special sitting beside Robert tonight. Would you tell us who he is?" I stepped to the microphone. "His name is Marcus Bell. My best friend Thomas worked beside me for almost 30 years. Several retired employees smiled. They remembered Thomas. "He saved my life during an explosion at our old plant." The room went completely silent. "When cancer took him, Marcus was 19. His father asked me for one thing before he died." My voice caught. "He asked me to look after his son." Marcus lowered his head. "I never replaced his father. I couldn't, but I've watched him become exactly the kind of man every father hopes to raise." The room applauded again, and Marcus wiped his eyes. Then I added the sentence I'd been holding on to all night. "If anyone deserved to sit in my own son's seat today, it was him." The room rose to its feet, a longer, stronger ovation than before. I saw grown executives wiping their eyes. And just when I thought the ceremony had reached its natural end, the CEO stepped back to the microphone. "Actually," he said, smiling, "we have one final surprise." I looked at him, confused. This wasn't rehearsed, not on my end anyway. "About 12 years ago," he began, "Robert approached the board with an unusual request. Instead of accepting future retention bonuses, he asked us to invest those funds into something that would outlive him. He called it the Legacy Gratitude Fund." The audience leaned forward. He opened a folder and read from a letter I'd genuinely forgotten writing years ago. "Money disappears, character doesn't. Help one good person and they'll spend a lifetime helping others." The room went perfectly still. For years, this fund quietly grew: company contributions, investment returns, private donations from retired executives. He paused. "Today, it has reached $800,000. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Even I hadn't known the final number. "The agreement gave Robert one privilege," the CEO continued. "He alone would choose its very first recipient." Every camera in the room swung toward me. Then he looked at Marcus. "Marcus Bell, please join us on stage." Marcus stood so slowly his knees visibly shook. When he reached us, the CEO extended his hand. "On behalf of this company, we're honored to present you with the very first Legacy Gratitude Award. $800,000. Marcus simply stared. I can't accept this." "You already have," the CEO said gently. Marcus turned to me, eyes filled with tears. "Why?" I put a hand on his shoulder. "Because your father once saved my life," I said, my own eyes stinging now. "And because you've spent the last 20 years honoring his." The audience rose again, and this time the applause seemed to go on forever. I had no idea that at that exact moment, somewhere in Arizona, my son and his wife had just watched every single second of it, live on television. I didn't rush out of that ballroom right away. Employees I hadn't seen in years wanted photos. Retirees hugged me. Supervisors who once terrified me as a young mechanic waited patiently just to shake my hand one more time. "I've never seen a ceremony like this," one woman from Human Resources told me. Marcus, meanwhile, kept whispering the same sentence to himself. I still can't believe this. I finally pulled him aside. Listen to me. That money isn't a reward for one afternoon. It's recognition for the man you've spent 20 years becoming. I don't even know how to thank you. You already have, I said. You showed up. Sometimes that's the greatest gift anyone can give. A little while later, the CEO found me by the window, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and handed me one. You okay? I think so. I've known you a long time, Robert. You've been trying very hard not to think about your son. I sighed. Am I that obvious? Only to old friends, he said. Do you want media to remove any mention of him? I thought about it. The broadcast had clearly shown that empty chair. People would have questions. This was exactly the kind of story that writes itself online: an aging father, an absent son, a stranger's fortune. No, I finally said. You're sure? I don't want anyone attacking him. I know, but you also don't want to hide the truth. He put a hand on my shoulder. You're a better father than most men would have been. I wasn't sure that was true. Good fathers don't always raise good sons. Sometimes they just keep loving them anyway. Marcus insisted on driving behind me all the way home, just to be sure I made it safely. When I finally pulled into my driveway, we stood there talking for nearly half an hour. What are you going to do with it? I asked him. Honestly, I haven't thought that far, he admitted. Then after a moment, my students. Our robotics program barely survives. Every year we lose kids because their families can't afford the equipment. He paused, then laughed. And maybe replace my 15-year-old truck. I was wondering how long it would take you to admit that. It's making some very concerning noises. He looked at me seriously. But my father earned that money, not me. Those words hit harder than I expected. His father would have smiled hearing him say that. After Marcus finally left, I walked into my quiet house, loosened my tie, and set the crystal award on the mantel beside Susan's photograph. You would have liked today, I told her picture. Then my phone began buzzing on the kitchen table. Once, twice, again and again. When I finally looked, the notifications ran off the screen: missed calls, voicemails, texts, more missed calls, 112 in total. Then the phone rang again. Daniel. This time I answered. Hi, son. His breathing sounded panicked. Dad, why didn't you tell me? Tell you what? The money, $800,000. You knew there would be a gift, I said calmly. You never told me the amount. You never asked. Silence, then, Dad, Melissa and I are driving to the airport right now. We're coming home. There's no need. We've already spent the money on flights. This isn't about the flights. Then what is it about? He didn't answer right away. Finally, quietly, I should have been there. I closed my eyes. Yes, you should have. Are you angry? I thought carefully before I answered. No, I'm disappointed. There's a difference, a very big one. Anger fades. Disappointment settles much deeper, and it stays. Melissa suddenly grabbed the phone. Robert, I think everyone's gotten a little carried away tonight. Hello, Melissa. People online are making Daniel look like a terrible son. I haven't spoken to anyone online. That empty chair embarrassed us. No, I said, it didn't embarrass you, you embarrassed yourselves. She had nothing to say to that. When she handed the phone back, Daniel's voice was smaller than I'd heard it in years. I'm coming over tonight, he said. I love you, Dad. The words caught me off guard. He hadn't said them in months, maybe longer. I love you too, I said, and the call ended. Within hours, clips from the ceremony were everywhere. Local news replayed the reveal. National outlets picked it up. The comment sections filled with strangers sharing their own stories about parents who had quietly sacrificed everything only to be forgotten by their own children. Reading through those comments made me uncomfortable, honestly. Strangers only knew one evening. They didn't know my son, not really. Daniel wasn't cruel. He wasn't greedy by nature. He had simply spent too many years believing there would always be another chance, another dinner, another phone call, another tomorrow. Life has a painful way of proving that theory wrong. As it got dark outside, headlights finally swung into my driveway. Daniel had come home, but he wasn't alone. Melissa stepped out beside him, and from the look on her face, this conversation was about to get a lot more complicated than I had prepared for. Daniel climbed out of the SUV with his shoulders slumped, looking years older than he had that same morning. Melissa followed close behind him, and unlike Daniel, she wasn't carrying any regret at all, just anger. "James, Robert," she caught herself, "we need to talk." I let them in. Neither of them said a word as they walked through my living room, past the worn leather recliner, the brick fireplace, Susan's old quilt folded neatly on the couch, the wall of family photographs. Daniel stared at those pictures for a long moment, himself at 6 with his first baseball trophy, at 16 with his new driver's license, at his college graduation standing between his mother and me, her smile so bright it still hurt to look at. "I haven't been in this house in a while," he finally said. "No," I answered softly, "you haven't." Melissa broke the silence first. "I'll just say what we're both thinking. $800,000 and you gave it to a stranger." "He's not a stranger," I said. "You could have at least mentioned something." "I didn't know the final amount myself." "You knew there was money," her voice sharpened, "and you chose someone else's son." I met her eyes. I chose someone who showed up. Daniel closed his eyes. "Dad." "Don't just sit there," Melissa snapped at him. "He embarrassed us in front of the entire country." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, we embarrassed ourselves. He invited us. We said no." Her face hardened. "So you're taking his side now?" "I'm taking the truth," Daniel said. The room went quiet. For the first time all evening, Melissa had nothing to say. Daniel finally turned to me. "I owe you an apology." "You do?" "I'm sorry." "I believe you," I said. "I just don't know what you're actually sorry about. Are you sorry you hurt me, or sorry that everyone else saw it happen?" He didn't answer, not because he was stubborn, because he honestly didn't know. I got up and walked to the spare bedroom, came back carrying 3 old storage boxes. Daniel recognized them instantly. "I haven't seen those since Mom," he said quietly. "Open them." He lifted the lid on the first one. Folders, receipts, faded envelopes. A tuition statement from his university, marked paid in full across the top. I thought scholarships covered most of this. "They covered some." "I never knew." "You weren't supposed to." He kept digging the mortgage paperwork for his first house, the down payment I'd quietly co-signed and later removed my name from, invoices from his own wedding. His eyes went wide over one receipt. "Dad, you paid for this." "I helped." "You never said anything." What would have been the point? Parents don't raise children to collect thank you notes. We raise them because that's what parents do. The second box was full of photographs. Susan sewing patches onto his Little League uniform after a 10-hour nursing shift, me reshingling our own roof myself, because paying a contractor would have meant dipping into his college fund. Camping trips instead of expensive vacations. Cakes baked at home instead of bought from bakeries downtown. Not because we couldn't occasionally spend more, because every extra dollar had a destination, and that destination was always him. He picked up a photo of his mother beside our old station wagon. "I remember this car. It had 200,000 miles on it. You kept saying you liked it." "I hated it," I admitted. "Then why didn't you buy a new one?" "Because a new transmission costs less than 1 semester of your textbooks." His shoulders started shaking. The third box held something different, letters. Dozens of them. Every birthday card his mother had written him before she died. Every note she'd tucked into his lunchbox in elementary school. He unfolded one, and her handwriting filled the page. "No matter how old you become, always remember that time is the most valuable gift you can give someone you love." That's when the real tears came. Not embarrassment, grief, regret. "I've become the man Mom warned me not to be," he whispered, covering his face. A soft knock interrupted us. I opened the door and found Marcus standing there with a small box in his hands. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know you had company." "It's all right," Daniel said, standing up. "Please stay." Marcus stepped in, set the box on the counter. "I brought dinner. Figured after today nobody remembered to eat." That sounded exactly like his father. Daniel watched him move through the kitchen. Marcus knew where the plates were kept, which cabinet held the glasses, that the coffee maker stuck unless you flipped the switch twice. Not because he lived there, because he'd been quietly showing up, helping, checking in for years, while my own son had been too busy to notice any of it. "How often do you come by?" Daniel asked him. Marcus looked embarrassed. "I don't know, every couple weeks." "Sometimes more," I added. "You've been taking care of my dad," Daniel said. "He took care of me first," Marcus answered simply. Melissa suddenly stood up. "This is unbelievable. Now everyone gets to act like Daniel's some terrible son." Nobody answered her. She grabbed her purse. "I'm not sitting here for a guilt trip." Daniel looked up at her. "You should go." She blinked. "What?" "You heard me. I need to stay. For him, for me." She stared at him for a long moment before walking out and letting the door slam behind her. Daniel didn't follow. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking at me like an obligation. He was looking at me like a son again. After she left, the house felt strangely peaceful. Marcus unpacked the dinner he'd brought: homemade soup, fresh bread, apple pie the way Susan used to bake it every fall. 3 men, 3 very different stories, sitting around one kitchen table. "I honestly don't remember the last time we had dinner together," Daniel said quietly. "It was Thanksgiving, 3 years ago. I thought it had only been a year." "Time moves faster than we realize," I told him. That sentence sat over the table longer than anything else said that night. The following week felt different. Daniel called every morning, not to ask for anything, not to explain himself, just to ask how I was doing. At first I wondered if it was guilt talking. But guilt gets tired. Consistency doesn't. One morning became a week, then a month. One afternoon he showed up with 2 old fishing rods. "Found these in the garage. Thought maybe if you're free Saturday." "I've been free for years," I told him. His eyes watered. "I know." That Saturday we drove to the same little lake where I'd taught him to fish when he was 8. The dock still leaned slightly. The paint faded, but everything else felt familiar. "I forgot how quiet this place is," he said. "That's why I like it." He stared out over the water. "I used to think success meant the biggest house, the newest car. I spent so much time chasing things, I forgot to make time for people." He looked at me. "You've shown up for me my whole life, and I stopped showing up for you." I didn't interrupt. He needed to hear himself say it. "I'm ashamed of that." "I know you aren't making this easy." "Forgiveness isn't difficult," I told him gently. "Trust is." He accepted that without arguing, and that alone told me something in him was really changing. Meanwhile, Marcus's life had transformed overnight. Reporters kept following the story. Former students wrote to thank him for inspiring them into engineering. Instead of hiding from the attention, he used it. He announced nearly half of the award would fund scholarships for students pursuing robotics and skilled trades. "I wouldn't be standing here," he told one reporter, "if someone hadn't believed in me long before I believed in myself." He never once mentioned my name unless someone asked. That was exactly who he was. A month later, he invited Daniel and me to his classroom. Teenagers crowded around half-built robots and tool benches. One girl walked up shyly. "Mr. Bell says you're the reason we got new equipment." "No," I laughed, pointing to Marcus. "He's the reason." She smiled. "He says you taught him generosity." Marcus caught my eye across the room. Neither of us said anything. We didn't have to. His father would have understood completely. Daniel started coming by every Sunday. Sometimes we watched football, sometimes worked in the yard, sometimes just drank coffee on the back porch. He never acted like one apology erased years of distance. Instead, he did something much harder. He simply kept showing up. One afternoon, he brought a toolbox. "What are we fixing?" I asked. "The fence." "It isn't broken." He smiled. "I know. I just wanted an excuse to spend the day with you." I laughed harder than I had in months. "Now you finally sound like my son again." Melissa never came back. She and Daniel separated quietly a few weeks later. No dramatic fights, no revenge, just 2 people realizing they'd been building different lives. "I don't blame her," Daniel told me one evening. "I made my own choices. I kept assuming you'd always understand." He shook his head. "I confused your patience with permission." That may have been the wisest thing he'd ever said to me. Several months after the ceremony, the company invited me back for the dedication of a new legacy gratitude mentorship program, expanding the original fund into a full initiative pairing experienced workers with young people entering the trades. This time, when I walked into the auditorium, the front row seat beside mine wasn't empty. Daniel was already sitting there. "Wanted to make sure I got here early," he said, standing as soon as he saw me. "You certainly did." Marcus sat on my other side. I looked at the two young men beside me, one connected by blood, the other by a promise I'd made 20 years earlier, and realized something simple. Family isn't weakened by gratitude, it's strengthened by it. This ceremony wasn't nearly as emotional as the first one. No surprise gifts, no cameras fixed on an empty chair, just dozens of young apprentices meeting mentors who genuinely cared about their futures. And honestly, that mattered more than any headline ever could. Walking to the parking lot afterward, Daniel stopped beside my truck. "Dads, thank you." "For what?" "For loving me, even when I made it hard." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Being your father was never the hard part. The hard part was waiting for you to find your way home." He wrapped his arms around me, the kind of hug that lasts long enough to say everything words never could. For the first time in years, I felt my family becoming whole again. Not because money had fixed anything. Money never repairs a relationship. Choices did that. Time did that. Humility did that. And love, the quiet, stubborn kind that refuses to disappear no matter how long it's ignored, finally got the gratitude it had always deserved. If this story reminded you of someone who's quietly sacrificed for your family, don't wait for a special occasion to tell them what they mean to you. Time is the one gift none of us can ever earn back.